dwarves want in hobbit. Dwarves have a strange notion of perfection.
Nobody tosses a dwarf!
The dwarves? They hide in their mountains seeking riches. They care nothing for the troubles of others.
Dwarves! I'm done for! Run for it!
I would cut off your head, dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground.
There's far too many dwarves in my dining room as it is.
What's up, everyone? It's Jim. Welcome back. This is Raise Game Fully. Today I'm making another video in my Mystara Revisited series, in which I talk about some products that were made back in the 1980s to flesh out and describe the game world that came to be known as Mystara in Dungeons & Dragons. As you may have guessed, today's video is all about dwarves and how they pertain to the world of Mystara, their home there, their history, and some cool rules that can kind of individualize your dwarf and give them a different feeling from just a standard run-of-the-mill dwarf, I suppose. Now, I assume everybody knows what I'm talking about when I reference dwarves. Dwarves are short but stout demi-humans. They're approximately 4.5 feet tall. They live underground. They're expert miners, engineers, craftsmen, and they have a long and storied history in fantasy literature and gaming. But today's video is about the dwarves on the world of Mystara and what makes them different or special from dwarves you might find elsewhere. So, I present to you The Dwarves of Rockhome, written by Aaron Alston. Cover art here is done by Clyde Caldwell, the artist who did all of the cover art for the Gazetteers series. And to kind of give you a perspective, to tell you where Rockhome is in the game world and how much area it encompasses, I'm going to bring up this map from the expert rulebook that I showed you a long time ago. This was a black and white hex map of the western continent of Mystara and all the nations that are found there. I've described several of them to you guys already in this series. The nation of Rockhome is this shaded area here, and as you can see, it takes up a large area in the eastern central part of the continent. It borders 5 other nations, and there are roads that go through Rockhome, and the dwarves, they charge tolls to travel on these roads, and there is quite a bit of traffic that goes from the desert nation of Olarawam to the south, up into the northern reaches to the east, and even into the lands of Athengar to the north. That's a nation I haven't spoken about yet. The map that came with the product was hard for me to find online. I couldn't find a large picture of the large fold-out map that usually accompanies these products. I instead took this map from the Vaults of Pandius, which is the official Mystara website. This hex map here was designed by Thorfinn, who does a great job with all of his cartography. And as you can see, even though the nation of Rockhome is heavily mountainous, there are pastoral lands included in the nation around the 2 lakes that exist here in Rockhome. There are above ground settlements, there are underground settlements, and the roads kind of crisscross the nation north to south to allow travel through the nation. The lakes are the predominant features above ground in Rockhome, but as usual, there are lots of other cool features underground that I will discuss. The booklet starts with the players section, and it gives you just a general welcome to Rockhome, describes how the Gazetteer is organized, sort of like a table of contents, and there is a really great note here attached to the first page under final notes. Aaron included a similar disclaimer in his other product that I've already talked about, the Elves of Alfheim. The paragraph reads like this, and I do want to share it with everybody. This source book, and in fact the whole series, has been written for you to use in your campaign and to your own ends. This means you can and should change whatever you don't like before fitting it into your campaign. Do you want your dwarves to be friendly and outgoing to strangers? Do you want to deal with dwarf clerics? Change whatever you want and have fun. And I can't emphasize this enough because this comes up all the time on social media. with playing rules as written or you know, the rule of cool or what have you. The game was always designed to be fun. The game was always designed to have dungeon masters and world builders take what they want, use what they want, and discard the parts they don't want. And it's just nice to see it in writing, and it was worth repeating. I wanted to share that with everybody. The next section has a very short history about the Dwarven race, the legend about how they were created by the immortal Cagiar, and the very first dwarf king, Denwarf. He was supposedly chosen by the immortals, he was given all kinds of power, he united the dwarven clans, and then he disappeared. As he forged Rockhome into the nation that it is, he was the first king of the dwarves, and as soon as his kingdom had been established and the rules of the nation set down and the way the clans will behave and interact, he disappeared. And I bring this up because this is kind of an ongoing device throughout the book, that there always is the chance that Denwarf will return. And in fact, in one of the published adventures in the book, he does in fact return. The character creation section is fairly straightforward. One of the aims of the author was to kind of condense and codify what it means to play a dwarf in Beckme Dungeons & Dragons. Dwarves had kind of been exposed or revealed in pieces, maybe a little bit in this rule book, a little bit in that rule book, maybe something else in this adventure. And I think what the author was trying to do for the first time was bring all that information together into one source to present a singular version of dwarves in the game. So as a result, most of the stuff here is a repeat of the basic rulebook, describes how to make a dwarf character. In basic Dungeons & Dragons, dwarfs are a class, not just a race. So you would play a dwarf, that would be your class. Dwarves were essentially fighters. They're poor at magic, they have high magic resistance, and they don't really do well as thieves or magic users. There is an exception here, as you can see on this slide. They're talking about the Dwarf Cleric. The Dwarf Cleric was kind of an expansion on the original rulebook. Like the standard dwarf progression, they are limited to 12th level of experience. And you can see the experience point chart, although it's very small, here on the page in front of you. But it did provide for clerics, and it was very, very cool because it gave them a religious aspect that you don't really see in other media. One cool thing about these clerics is it mentions here they have alignment restrictions. They, of course, have to be lawful, which is a little bit different. If you're familiar with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, lawful is essentially good, but it requires that clerics be lawful, and is a neat caveat to some of their spell casting, which is in the section below that. One cool thing is that dwarf clerics can learn any spell that human clerics can learn. However, one thing that's different is with the raise dead spells, dwarf clerics can only raise dwarves, which I thought was kind of interesting and unique. At first I didn't quite like it, but it kind of made sense given all the lore that's presented in this book. By definition, they are extensions of the dwarven god, and they have a special affinity for their own race. They're kind of solitary race. They don't really venture outside of their mountain. So it kind of made sense from a lore point of view that the dwarven clerics would only have the ability to raise other dwarves. Fortunately, for any dwarf clerics out there, you can use healing spells on any race that you come across, which is very, very beneficial in an adventuring party. The next section talks about the 7 dwarf clans. They are the Burodar, the Everast, the Herwarf, the Skarad, the Circlist, the Torquerest, and the Weirwarf. They're listed here underneath the picture, and it also describes what the clans are. Just a quick description of the clans. They could be isolationists, they could be theocratic, they could be militaristic type of clan, but every dwarf character will belong to one of the 7 clans. They can either choose it, they can roll a random die 100 here to see what which clan they are born into, And the book goes on to describe each clan with a few paragraphs, talks about them, where their name came from, a quick description of their clan, and other clans' relations to their clan. I'm not going to go into this now. It is summarized in a small table I'll get to in a moment. The other really cool thing about this section here are just some really cool pen and ink illustrations for dwarven weapons. The following page continues this. It's got some clan helmets. Each clan kind of wears their own helmet style, which is very, very cool. I love the artwork there. There's a section on names. Basically, the way the Gazetteer describes it is it gives you prefixes and suffixes, and you can mix and match a prefix that you like with a suffix that you like, and you kind of come up with a dwarf name. Anybody who's familiar with fantasy literature or movies knows that dwarf names tend to be short. They tend to have lots of consonants, and they tend to be, for lack of a better term, harsh sounding. But of course, you're free to name your dwarf anything that you wish. Following this, there was also a section on skill use. I've touched upon this in my other videos. Characters were given a choice of skills that just kind of flesh out their character and give you some more background, some more depth to them. I'm not going to go into that again. This Gazetteer didn't really go into that heavily. Suffice it to say that dwarves are all born with a desire and a clan directive to mine and engineer and build things. It's a very big thing for a dwarf to have something after they pass on. They have a cultural and even a racial desire to build and create things. So skills such as mining or metalworking are very appropriate for a dwarf. There's a large section on society and politics. I'm not going to go into this too much. It does talk about the character of the dwarf, what it means to be a dwarf. You're not just a short human with an axe. You are a different race completely. And it kind of touches upon some of those things in case you want to really get into the role-playing part of your character. The first one here is work. To put it simply, dwarves are workaholics. They get up in the morning, they work all day, they go to bed, they repeat the process. They are obsessed, as I mentioned, with mining and crafting, and to fully embrace the idea of being a dwarf, you should embrace the idea of work and no play. Interestingly, the next paragraph talks about play and sleep. The work mania described here doesn't mean they're incapable of relaxing. They enjoy having company and telling stories and feasting, but they also use it as time off. They use it when they're not working, and then they get back to work. They're not as laid back and lackadaisical as elves per se. It does talk about craftsmanship, how every dwarf from birth is trained in the trades of mining and engineering, how to dig, how to find gems and metals. It talks about transitory arts, and this is crafting things that are more of a more temporal nature, such as woodworking or leatherworking. As you might gather with the personality that I described, dwarves aren't too keen on making things, making crafts out of temporary materials. If something's going to rot or break down or fall apart, a dwarf doesn't want any part of it. A dwarf wants to make sure that something is going to build, that they build is going to last forever. This brings us to agriculture, which is kind of an interesting topic in Rockhome. The farmers, even though agriculture and farming is acknowledged as being essential, everybody needs to eat, everybody needs to feast, everyone needs to drink, the farmers are certainly looked down upon. The profession of farming is considered beneath the regular dwarf. It's considered dirty, it's considered unclean. There's nothing to show for a career as a farmer. If you're building something, it will remain after you pass on. A farmer spends all of their time growing and cultivating food, which is either eaten or rotting and is destroyed. There's no testament to your clan. There's no testament to you as a dwarf or to your family after you pass on. And there is quite a bit of hatred or disdain among the dwarven clans towards farmers. And obviously that's up to each individual campaign. It's up to an individual dungeon master how much of that they want to include in their campaign, or if they want to include it at all. It's something that you can use if you choose, just to give the nation of Rockhome just an added flavor or an added dimension to it. There is also a section on warfare. The dwarves defend their territory very fiercely. It was given to them by the immortal. It is their home. They have a long history here. They know that other nations covet their lands because they are so rich in mineral resources, and they're basically unspoiled from human lands. There is a great deal of desire from people to steal resources from the dwarves, and the dwarves have a long tradition of warfare, whether it's between the clans or whether it's between other nations. The dwarves do know how to fight. They wear heavy armor, they have heavy weapons, and they're very, very good at fighting. This next page here I wanted to show you for a couple of reasons. One is just some really cool artwork from Stephen Fabian, but it also talks about jewels and accoutrements that dwarves typically wear on their person. If they're home, if they're in Rockhome, if they're just going back and forth to work, they tend to wear lots of gold and jewelry. It's kind of a status symbol. I found this, I crafted this, this is what I have made, and I'm proud to wear it. Adventurers probably don't want to wear too many jewels and gems. It's kind of an invitation to get robbed. But it does talk about adventuring dwarves, how they always have some type of trinket, maybe about their home or maybe about their clan. They usually have a bracelet or an earring or two, just as a decoration. It's widely accepted in both sexes in the dwarven nation. There's a small section here on weapons. I've mentioned that dwarves are always carrying weapons. They tend to favor axes and hammers. They almost always have a dagger on their person, and they know how to use them. There was a small section on government. It talks about the king. Rockhome is ruled by a king. The current king is called Everast, and he is aided by a senate among the dwarves. This has been in place for almost 1,000 years. Just a council of dwarves brought from all of the clans. I think they number about 250, and they assist the king in carrying out policy. The way the book describes it is they kind of meet and decide whether or not they will obey the king's laws, which is kind of funny. I can just picture all kinds of arguments as the king makes a decree and all the clan members get together and just tell him what a horrible idea it is. So there's some great ideas there for role-playing or for having your characters walk into a Senate meeting or knowing a senator. I mean, there's some politics there. It's as much, again, that says whatever you want to put into it, as much or as little as you want to invest in your campaign, but that is part of the government in Rockhome. The next section of society and politics deals with clan relations. I mentioned this a short minute ago. You can kind of see the chart here that has the 7 clans and their relation with the other 6 clans. It's kind of small, but it tells you that their relations are either good, fair, neutral, or poor. And this, if you just have one dwarf in the party, this might just be kind of a background thing, what clan they're from, who they have friends and who they have enemies with. If you are creating a dwarven campaign set in Rockhome, or maybe venturing out from Rockhome periodically, then this really comes into play. If you've got 4 or 5 or 6 characters from Rockhome and they're all from different clans, how are they going to interact? How are they going to get along? And depending on what level of conflict you want to have within your own party, this here is a chart that will kind of tell you which clans get along with which other clans. The society section goes on to talk about guilds. These are craft guilds. They're familiar to guilds that may exist in other nations, but there are some other societies here that the book talks about. My favorite one is the Thorns. The Thorns are a group of dwarves. The description is fantastic. It describes it as a society of dwarves who are too old to stay home and too young to know any better. And the Thorns are a group of dwarves that get together every once in a while. They sneak out of Rockhome and they go to elven communities, and they play pranks on the elves. They'll undermine the land so that the sinkholes happen. They engineer mudslides. They just create havoc to just kind of irritate and annoy the elves. The elves, of course, are on to this. They know that the dwarves come out and do this every once in a while. They don't take it too seriously, but they delight in stopping the dwarves in their tracks. And it usually doesn't end up in violence or or death. It just kind of ends up in some pranks, maybe some injuries, and usually ends up with the dwarves hightailing it back to Rockhome as fast as they can. Another group mentioned here is the clergy. There's just kind of a loose organization with the clerics, nothing fancy, nothing in the way of organized religion, say, that Karamikos has. There is a society called the Hammer. The Hammer is kind of a terrorist organization. The Hammer meets in secret every now and then. Nobody really knows who's in the Hammer. And they kind of go out and they bully the farmers whenever they aren't doing what the farmers should be doing. I didn't include this in my campaign. I really didn't like it too much. I didn't like the fact that there are dwarves picking on and harassing and maybe even murdering other dwarves who seem to be like not in their place, not doing what they're supposed to be doing. This very, very racist, hateful group of people that's kind of terrorizing the farmers, but it is listed in the book. They talk about the underside also. There really aren't thieves' guilds in the Dwarven nation, but in larger cities, such as Dengar, the capital city, there is definitely an underside to the city. There is definitely a place where you can buy stolen goods, things kind of disappear and reappear, shady stuff happens, and it's all organized by this group called the Underside. And it talks about that a little bit here. It goes on to talk about the family as a company. Each family is essentially a business. It's a company. You go to work every day for your family. You make a profit. Your family will pay you, not necessarily a salary, but they'll take care of you. They'll make sure that you've got a place to stay, and they make sure that you've got food in return for the work that you're doing for the family. And there's definitely a company mentality to family life in Rockhome. And it just touches upon that a little bit here. And it goes on to talk about jobs, how dwarves technically do work for their family, what they do with their income. It mentions adventuring income. If you are a dwarf adventurer, it is fully expected that when you return from exploring ruins or working outside the nation, it's fully expected that you come back and share your money either with the family or with the government or even with the church. You're supposed to share in the wealth that you find, as everything that you do is for your family, which is your company, which is your job. So that is an aspect of Dwarven society. I did want to show this picture here, just because I think this drawing looks like Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. Love this picture. And then the next section here talks about coinage. I thought this was very interesting because in Rockhome they have more than just the standard copper, silver, gold, and possibly platinum. It says here that they mine several coins. They have the traditional gold piece, which they call the trader. It has a traditional silver piece, which they call the star, traditional copper piece, which they call the stone. But they also have other coins that they mint. They mint a large silver coin that is also worth one gold piece, called the moon. So the moon and the trader are essentially the same thing. One's made out of gold, one's made out of silver. And they also have a very, very large gold coin that's worth 10 gold pieces. These are called suns. I thought this was really, really cool. I thought it was a great idea. You know, they've got the ore, they've got the minerals, they've got the smelting process. Why not make a different coin? Why not make different coinage than the rest of the world has seen? And it's really, really cool then if you bring adventurers into Rockhome and they could possibly find a small chest of these sun coins, right? So, you know, 10 sun coins is 100 gold pieces. Like, that's just a really great find for a first level character. So it just gave an extra flavor to the campaign that I really, really thought was cool. This does go on to talk about the military. I'm not going to get into that too much. It does give statistics for the War Machine, which were a set of rules that existed in the companion rule book. If you have a rule cyclopedia, it's in there as well, but it does give some some military statistics for those units if you wanted to use them. There's also a calendar. This is based on the Thaetian calendar that I've mentioned before. The Empire of Thyatis has kind of standardized the calendar for the Western continent. This is just a take on that. I thought it was kind of interesting that they use a human calendar, but they use Dwarvish. They're so into their Dwarven heritage as far as language and history goes, but they use a human calendar, but I'm sure it was just for ease of play and continuity. There's a large section on the Dwarven language. I'm not going to get into this, but here is a screen of it if you're interested. It does give some rough translations for some words or parts of words, in case you wanted to incorporate that into your campaign. There's also some cool drawings here for some weapons. Like I mentioned, the Dwarves are engineers. They love to create mining implements, tools, machines, weapons. So this is kind of a crank catapult thing that they're showing here, which is pretty cool. And the next section is on Dwarven tasks. And Dwarves can make things that other races can't. They can make magical things, even though they're not magic, even though they're not wizards. It's kind of a long section. I'm not going to go into all of this right now. There are some fairly extensive rules on crafting things, how much time, how much manpower, which in terms of giving up experience points, or how much material you would need to create something. But it gives you a set of rules to allow you to create something out of scratch, to kind of just mod your own weapons, your armor, your equipment, and the chances of success and the time taken to craft it. This particular page here talks about craft magic. As I mentioned, by nature of being craftsmen, they can craft, say, a magic weapon, even though they're not magical themselves. They can put rare minerals into it, they can use rare components, and create a weapon that does come out as a finished product with some magic, which I thought was great. There's some rather extensive rules here. This page shows the basic process. I'm not going to get into all the rules. Feel free to get a PDF of this and check it out. Some cool drawings here of some armor. There's a small section on science. I never like to include scientific things in my D&D game. It talks about their engineering, and maybe they would engineer devices to enable faster mining or enable you to farm quickly, maybe like a farming tractor of some type. I never really got into that, but it is included here in the Gazetteer if that's something that you like in your campaign, something along the lines of an artificer. And the author acknowledges that this can get out of hand. There's a section on like what you shouldn't do, things that you should not include in the game. And it does even mention like it's okay to play these things or create these things for comedy effects, have them blow up or have them malfunction, just to keep the game light. But it does mention these crafts that the Dwarves are always trying to create and make. The section after this talks about cities. And one thing that's really unique to Dwarves, at least I first was exposed to this in the Dragonlance. The Dwarves on Krynn, their cities were described this way, and I'm not sure if this came from that or vice versa. But they talk about modular city design. Dwarves find a design that works, and they stick to it. They're very fond of the adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they find what works. So in a city, for example, let's say you want a city block with a four-way intersection. The Dwarves have come up with a perfected design. So if you have a city and you have a city block with a four-way intersection, it should look like this. Or if you have a block of a city that has a city gate, it has to look like this. Or if you have a reservoir, it looks like that. And this has lent itself to a modular design of cities. And the maps that were included in the product, which I'll show you in a moment, not only lay out the map in terms of a drawing of walls and towers, etc., but the city is built into grids, and each grid has a letter next to it. And the lettered block will describe what's found in that city block. There's some examples here on the screen. Block A would be a palace. Block D would be apartments. Block E would be tenements. And a sample diagram here on this page kind of shows you what a section of a city would look like. So you can see the grid down there, diagram A, where you've got block E, E, J, D. You would just look up in your book and see what these correspond to. And in this way, you can describe a city very, very easily. Each blacksmith block looks like the last blacksmith block. And it is true that dwarven cities are pretty repetitive and boring in that regard. They're not artistic like an elvish home, for example, but they work. They find something that works and they stick with it, and they are just fond of keeping things familiar and keeping things working. And the maps in this book will be broken down into these letter grids like you see here. The DM section of the book starts with a history. It goes into more detail about the legend that the dwarves were created by. I'm not going to get into that because it's fairly accurate. There's a timeline here that all the gazetteers are fond of having. I love this feature so much. It kind of puts it all in perspective, especially if characters are traveling from one nation to another. There's a really cool diagram here about ventilation systems, how airflow is incorporated into the city to keep the air breathable and fresh. And there's a large section on the city of Dengar. Dengar is the capital city of Rockhome. It's where the king lives. And it's actually broken into two pieces, or two segments. There's Upper Dengar, which is on the surface of the tallest mountain in Rockhome. Like right on the slope of the mountain, there's a city built there. And then inside the mountain, underground, is Lower Dengar. Lower Dengar is, of course, a much larger city, and there are a lot more things to be found there. This section describes some of the places in both Upper Dengar and Lower Dengar. I'm not going to go into all of them here. You're welcome to describe the city in any way you wish. Here is a map of Upper Dengar, and it's laid out in that letter grid style that I described. You can see at the bottom there's the keep. It kind of stands as the front gate. And then inside there are the letter grid pattern. The great thing about this map here is that they left some areas blank in case you wanted to add to it or kind of individualize your own section of the city. But at the very back of the city is the mountain face again, with a large gate that leads into the mountain and down into Lower Dengar, which is pictured here. The entrance to Lower Dengar is at the bottom of the map. And as you can see, it leads into yet another letter grid pattern of the city. And there are other things carved into the mountain as well. There's the Black Lake Cavern on the left. There's the River Run Cavern on the right. And on the back, there's another underground lake with some settlements on it. The next section of the Gazetteer talks about other sites of interest. It talks about some other cities in the nation of Rockhome. Each section will give you a little box description, quick snapshot of the population, the mix of the town, whether it's all dwarf or maybe it's mixed races, the clans that have a major influence in there, and the military strength of the town. It also goes into details on each town. I'm not going to describe all those to you. Here's another, this is probably the second largest city in Rockhome, the city of Stahl, which is on the shores of Lake Stahl. And again, as you can see, it's laid out in the letter grid pattern. There was a large section on characters. I'm not going to get into all the characters. There were, I think, 22 or 23 characters described here. I think it went into 3 or 4 characters from each of the 7 clans. Basically the clan leader, the master, the king, any close family members who are relevant to their stories. I did like the artwork here. I wanted to share that with you. There are some other non-dwarf characters introduced here. There's the ambassador from Karamikos, whose name is Hiraxos maybe. He's a great character for any human who might be in town, especially if your party is from Karamikos, which a large portion of basic Dungeons & Dragons characters were. He's a great contact. He's just a kind of a quiet man who interacts with the dwarves and kind of can offer some guide services to the city. There's some great low-level characters described as well, characters you might meet in an alley or might meet in the tavern, such as a wandering magic user, which is a rare thing in Rockhome. But again, this is kind of up to you as a dungeon master, what characters you want to include and which characters you want to exclude, or maybe you have a library of your own that you want to insert in the town. There's a section on monsters. Monsters from the basic rules, expert rules, companion rules, master rules that are common in and around Rockhome. It does introduce a couple of new monsters as well. This particular one illustrated here is called a choker. They're these strange humanoid creatures with very, very long arms and legs that tend to hide in caverns. They don't really have bones. They kind of squeeze through crevices and mountains, and it reaches out and like strangles its victims, hence the name. Kind of a bizarre creature, only a 3-hit die monster, so nothing terribly terrifying. Some other cool things are lake monsters, which are small, dinosaur-like creatures that are amphibious. They have these Rockhome lizards that are large chameleon-like creatures, just kind of pop up every now and then and cause a ruckus. The next section talks about the campaign. As I mentioned before, are you, as a world designer or dungeon master, are you creating a campaign with a bunch of dwarves from Rockhome as your adventuring party? Or is Rockhome more of a place that you're going to visit once in a while? Maybe one of your characters is from there. It's going to be very, very different whether or not Rockhome is the focus of your campaign or merely just a stop on the road in your campaign. And this section talks about that. It talks about those family ties. If you're from Rockhome as a dwarf, you need to know your family connections. You need to know what clan you're from, because that's going to influence who you talk to, where you go, how you're received when you do come into Rockhome. If you are a whole party of dwarves from Rockhome, it is important to know what your interactions and obligations are, especially if you're from different clans. So it talks about making Rockhome fit into your individual campaign and some of the flavors or some of the themes that you would include in those designs. It also shows this really cool diagram here about a typical dwarven home that's built inside of a stalactite. There are huge caverns inside of Rockhome, and they are filled with gigantic stalactites. And the dwarves have learned how to mine them without having them collapse or break. So it's very, very common to have stalactite homes. And this is a great drawing here of a typical stalactite home, how many rooms and how many staircases that would exist, what have you. It has water reservoirs that are used to come down into various parts of the house. I thought that was great. One thing also that it talks about is monotony. It talks about that if you are crafting one of those all dwarven campaigns, how can you prevent your campaign from getting boring? And it kind of just threw that back to the dungeon master and said, do what you want with it. It recommends not having a campaign 100% dwarves. Even if you want to have more than one, that's fine. It kind of discourages you from having a campaign that's all dwarves, whether they're PCs or NPCs, to mix it up, because the dwarven lifestyle is monotonous. It's just get up and work and mine and craft and go to bed and have some feasts and do it all over again. Great lifestyle, great story, but it doesn't make for great adventuring. So it kind of talks about if you're crafting a campaign that's all dwarves, bring in an NPC, bring in a human, bring in an elf, bring in somebody who likes dwarves and wants to share in their experiences, bring in someone who doesn't like dwarves and there might be some conflict. So you have to use some tricks like that if your campaign is focused on the dwarven aspect of it. This section here of the Gazetteer is an adventure. There were 3 full adventures that were included in the Gazetteer. This one here is probably my favorite. It's called Race for the City, in which the characters get wrapped up in that group of dwarves I talked about, the Thorns, and it talks about sneaking out of Rockhome to go, play some pranks on the elves. This is a great adventure for our low-level characters. The second adventure is called The Lost Caverns, where a colony of dwarves gets buried or lost, and you have to go find them and extract them. The third adventure is Clan War, and in Clan War, the legendary first king of the dwarfs, Dwarf, returns, and he wants to take his kingdom back from the current king. And like lines are drawn, dwarves are choosing sides, and there's a civil war to determine the ruler of the country. This is a little involved, and it obviously lends itself to wargaming, but this was a really cool adventure if you decided to run it. There's also 13 short adventure hooks that came in the Gazetteer as well. They handle short little things like someone got kidnapped, or there were a group of cave lizards that are running amok in a city, and just things that you have to do to stop them. Some really, really great short adventure hooks here. I'm not going to describe all of them. One of them, which I will talk about briefly, is Redtooth. And Redtooth is a dwarf that was bitten by a vampire, and he's causing problems for the party. This is a little bit of a higher level adventure. It's a level for characters who are perhaps 9th or 10th or 11th level. But it's just a great idea that, like, yes, dwarves are afflicted by vampirism, and there is one in your town, or there is one in your city, and you need to deal with it. They're just great there. There are higher level adventures here as well, but I'm not going to get into the higher level adventures. Well, that brings us to the end of the Dwarves of Rockhome. I never owned this product back in the day when I was DMing a large group of kids. I wish I had. Dwarves were always so one-dimensional for me. I thought that I knew everything about them. I thought that I knew everything there was to know about dwarves. But after having read this book, it was really eye-opening, and it taught me that there are lots of other things that a dwarf can be. There are lots of other aspects to playing a dwarf than just being a simple axe-wielding miner that ventures out to defeat goblins or to play pranks on elves. Really enjoyed this product. I thought it was excellent. That's all for this video. I will take a moment to say, if any of you are in the Boston area next week, my family and I, the whole Raise Game Fully crew, will be going to PAX East. If any of you are going to PAX East, we will be there on Saturday. If you see me, by all means say hi. I'd love to chat, love to talk with people. Always eager to talk about D&D anytime. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please remember, be kind to your fellow players.